First of all, let me start off by saying that if you are going through something that is particularly painful, maybe it's a death in the family, or maybe you lost your job, or maybe you're just going through a tumultuous time right now, don't expect that this video is going to be super comforting. It's more intended to be true than it is to be comforting, and the truth isn't always super comforting, to be perfectly honest. But we do need to know the truth in order for our lives to heal properly. It's kind of like a bone. If you break a bone, yeah, it'll heal by itself if you don't touch it. It might be crooked or something like that, but it'll heal. But that's not good, right? If you want your bones to heal properly, you gotta set them. Maybe there comes a point in your life where you need to hear this. Just be aware of that from the outset. So the question I hear sometimes is something along the lines of, well, how can you say there's a God when there's so much suffering in the world? And that's a fair question. But what are people really saying when they ask that question? Basically, what they're saying is something along the lines of this: the world isn't the way I think that it should be. Or another way of saying that might be, if I were God, things would look a lot differently in the world. And if there was a God, he would think like me. And therefore, if he thought like me, the world would be different than it is, and therefore there can be no God. So what are the bare minimum attributes of God? If there is a God, what is he like at the minimum? Well, for one, he's got to be ultra powerful. You're talking about a God who's created stars, okay? A God who's created space-time, matter, energy, all of these things. In order to create something, you got to be greater than it. So God is clearly super powerful, beyond our comprehension. Okay, that's attribute number one. Attribute number two, God has to be super, super, super intelligent. Just looking at the world around us, from biology to physics to mathematics, I mean, God is responsible for creating all of it. People have been studying the human body for what, millennia? And we still hardly know how any of it works. And that's just the body. There's DNA. There's the coding in physics, from E equals mc squared to a squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is all coding that's all been written into the fabric of the universe, okay? And these are things that we're still trying to figure out. So God has to be super, super, super intelligent to be able to engineer all of this stuff and to figure it all out. Three, God has to be outside of space-time to begin with. So space-time is part of the universe, and there was a time where the universe didn't exist, so therefore God must exist outside of that entirely. Now, that's not something that we can totally wrap our minds around, but there it is. So those are three of the minimum attributes of God: ultra powerful, ultra intelligent, outside of space-time. Now, does that sound anything like you? Probably not, right? It probably sounds nothing like you. Actually, it sounds probably the opposite of you. Even if you are very smart, you're not that smart. Even if you're very powerful, you're not powerful enough to create stars. And you're definitely subject to the laws of space-time. So, if God at a minimum is nothing like you, what makes you suppose that he would think anything like you? Well, there's not much to go on there, is there? Therefore, why are we surprised when we find that the universe doesn't look like how we would imagine it? Actually, it makes perfect sense that the world's not the way we would imagine it to be. And this lines up very well with what we see in the Bible. If you read in Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So the Bible recognizes fully how people think and how God thinks are virtually completely different. So the fact that there's suffering in the world definitely doesn't disprove the idea of God. Now, the next thing that people usually say is, well, okay, if there is a God, it can't be the God of the Bible, because the God of the Bible supposedly is a God of love, and, what kind of God would subject their, the objects of their love to such suffering? And that's a fair question as well. But here's the thing. If you're going to suggest that the God of the Bible is not a God of love, then you're really going to have to explain Jesus. So I made a video a while ago explaining the gospel, explaining Jesus and why he came and all that stuff. You can go watch that if you are confused about that, or if you want to just watch it. But when you study the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, you find that he claimed to be God, and that he came to redeem mankind, to make a way for man to be reconnected with God. And if you study the Gospels, you realize that Jesus suffered one of the most agonizing, torturous deaths imaginable Furthermore, taking upon himself the wrath of God, which we don't really understand, probably even a little bit, frankly. So the question is, like, why would God do something like that? Why would God subject himself to such torment and death and all of that stuff? So we're given that answer in John 3. Actually, one of the most famous verses in the New Testament is John 3:16. Jesus says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." That's John 3:16 and 17. So Jesus basically states that the whole reason for him coming into the world at all was because of the love of God. And you really have to think about that. Before Jesus was crucified in the Garden of Gethsemane, he prays and asks the Father to spare him from the fate that he was about to endure, because obviously, nobody wants to go through that. But he says, if there's no other way, then let's do this. And there was no other way. One of the things you have to realize is that the price for covering sins was basically God himself. And God is not a created being. He is infinite. And he is literally the highest price that could have ever been paid for the redemption of mankind. So the question is, why would he go through all that if not for love? Really, love is the only logical explanation for it. Okay, so in light of this, maybe there is a God, and maybe God really loves us. But that doesn't really explain why suffering. Why do we suffer in life? What's the deal with that? We're going to save that for another video. So stay tuned. If you're interested in finding out about that, you can subscribe. You'll get the notification when that video comes out. If you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and leave them for me. I'll address them if I can, maybe even in a video. Planning on doing a few more of these, God willing. All right, let's just see how this goes. Let's just see how this turns out. Let's start small.